On a mission given to me by Woody Shaw, Sunship, Dizzy, and John Kahn, dedicated to pursuing a piece of our cultural heritage through interviews with my music heroes, this is The Jake Feinberg Show. Folks, welcome inside the Paris Sea Palace high above 2919 East Broadway. This is The Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk 1210. Please, if you're listening live all over the world, please go to powertalk1210.com to stream and also download the Power Talk app. It is the way you can access all the local shows here on Power Talk, as well as the Jake Feinberg Show and all my podcasts. It's powertalk1210.com. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in a guy who is consistently focusing and advocating for rebirth and regeneration, original stylings on the guitar. He's played with many luminaries. He's played with a lot of unsung cats. He falls somewhere in the middle. Henry Kaiser, welcome to the Jake.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Here I am.
Hey,
Here we are.
Yes, I mean it's so great to connect with you. I wanted to ask you, could you tell the audience how you connected with Bapuji Tiji Munoz?
Oh, Tiji Munoz. Now, that's an interesting story. If people don't know who he is, he's a great Puerto Rican American guitarist who is the best person doing John Coltrane and many other things on guitar. I'd had a record of his in college, his first album. Then after college, I saw that mail order, he had a 2 LP set out called Visiting This Planet, and I ordered it, and I really liked it, and there was a phone number for the record company on it. I just called up to say how much I liked it, and he answered the phone. And he was kind of very guarded and protective. And it was like, well, okay, yeah, thanks a lot. And then about a year later, I think I called him back again, and all of a sudden he was very friendly and open. And I had a really nice long talk with him, and I didn't know anything about him. And we kind of talked about music a little bit, and I gave him my phone number. And then he started to call me every once in a while, or I'd call him, and we would just talk about stuff. And then he started to put out more albums, a lot of CDs. And then I started to kind of get a glimpse of his personal life, that he was sort of an astrology guru and spiritual figure to a community of people around him in Schenectady, New York. And I got the feeling that he kind of was around people who were always, yes, yes, Bapu, yes, master, all the time, and he liked somebody to talk to, not to talk about guitar, because he's not interested in that, but he liked having somebody else to talk to. That's where he could take off his guru hat. And the years went by, and he put out more CDs, and I wrote some reviews, and I wrote some notes, and he said, let's make a CD together. I was like, okay, sure, all right. And he said, come on out here. And I said, well, why don't we get Marilyn Crispell to play piano, because I played with her, and I know that you guys would hit it off really well. And Mark Dresser's the best bass player I know that I play with, and my friend Lucas Leggetti's handy. He's a great drummer. And so we did, and we made this record, which I forget the title of.
I saw it on CD. It caught my attention. Actually, it's just so classic to talk to you. You have no idea the overlap in my interest and your interest. It's quite remarkable. But
I could see that when I looked at some of your interviews.
Yeah, but I didn't really send you. I'm doing more research on you. You have no idea how much. Anyway, I want to be clear.
I found out Tiji was this incredible gentleman and amazing guitar player, and I was shocked to find out that the really loud-sounding guitar players on his albums are played at about the speaker volume that your grandmother would set her clock radio to wake up in the morning.
What does that mean to you?
It's just that he had his own way of doing things, and he'd also play with the amp in another room. It was very surprising. And then I saw him live more times. We became really good friends, and we gave each other guitars as presents, and we just always stay in touch. And I'm addicted to listening to him, so I get every release he puts out, which is, I think he's gotten to 50 now.
Well, I connected with Tiji. I did an interview with him and John Medeski, and then last year I did a joint interview with him and Paul Schaefer before the Tonight Show closed. I'll have to send that to you. And Tiji gave me my name. I don't know if he gave you a name. He gave me my...
No, he didn't give me a name.
My name is Sem Lodro, which means spirit of the mind. And Tiji and I are like you, where you were talking to him merely on a peer or just on a sort of a esoteric level, not even talking about music. I mean, that guy basically said, he goes, Jake, you're always squeezing my grapes. So he's a deep cat, and I haven't talked to him in a long time. I need to call him. He is really, when you say that he's channeling Coltrane, for the audience, non-musicians out there.
Okay, there's been a lot of guitarists who've been inspired by John Coltrane to an extreme degree. A couple of examples we could pick would be Carlos Santana and John McLaughlin,
right,
where they would both Coltrane's ideas of playing over chord changes like giant steps, and his ways of playing over modal Indian music droney backgrounds like My Favorite Things. They looked at those and incorporated them in their guitar playing a different way and tried to play with the velocity and virtuosity of Coltrane's sheets of sound. And Tiji's really the one person who does that best of anybody who's tried to do it. And you play it for anybody, and they kind of have to admit it right away. He just has these albums he's put out on his own label, so he's not something that's very well known. My pal Jim O'Rourke and I did a compilation for a Japanese label, hoping to get him more well known in Japan, but didn't get him over there. And it's amazing something so great is known to so few. And he's played with McCoy Tyner, Rashid Ali, Dave Liebman. A lot of people who played with Coltrane played with him. He's, as they say in the jazz world, he's a heavy cat.
Yeah,
let me jump back to one more thing to explain.
Man. Yeah, go ahead.
So if Tiji's kind of this spiritual guru, spiritual master, and thinking about incarnations and things like that, and I've seen him give several people who are friends of mine names like he did to you.
Yes.
So maybe the reason I don't get a name is I am kind of a different type of archetype or functional spirit than you would normally see, I would guess. What I am more than a regular person is I am more like a spirit animal that comes through this world once and is just a catalyst that's not important in people's stories, but it's just a little side thing that's there for a sentence or two in the story that changes the story, and then it's out of the story, and it doesn't have much consequence other than that, which is a typical folktale motif. I seem to work like that.
Yeah, I would actually count, without ever personally meeting you, I absolutely believe that he has a name for you. You might be a spirit animal, but your finger seems to be on the pulse of... I was born in 1978. So, I mean, I was born...
You're so young.
Yeah,
You're so young.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people...
Too.
Yeah, so basically... I was blown away because the only period of music in our history that I am an expert in is the early 1970s. And before I let you riff on this, I was reading last night an article, and the way that you talked about doing this music of Miles from this time. Now, Miles is just a pop name. I'm not disputing him as a leader and a player, but the music of that early 70s period, it could be Nwadishi, it could be Eddie Henderson, it could be the Grateful, I don't even listen to the Grateful Dead of the early 70s, but the early 70s period was this period where new portals, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care how high I am when I'm listening to this stuff, the new vectors and portals that were being searched for was incredible. And for some reason, it passed us by. And maybe because the business really sunk its teeth into the record industry. But I think that the fact that you continue to try to channel that eccentric energy, the incorporation of... I just don't think there was a more vibrant time of human music than the early 1970s. And
my 1920s could have been too. Who knows?
That's true. But I want you lived through that time. You started picking up the guitar around that time. Put me in that moment, and you talk about the visceral quality, because it was the music was burning. It was not about pacification at that point. Please break it down.
It was about asking questions, not about tranquilizing the masses.
That's right. Go for it. Riff.
Well, I grew up in that, so that seems normal to me. I grew up with non-commercial and free-form radio in its greatest and most multiplex of forms, when many stations were playing anything and everything, and all that kind of stuff could get to you. It seems like it could now with YouTube or being able to buy on everything on Amazon, but not really, because things are not so well curated as they were back then. Back then, I could go to an African record store on a big main street, and they would and this is early 70s, and they'd have records from all over Africa, imported from Africa, that somebody brought over in boxes for sale. Now, record stores are gone, but if I look on Amazon, they haven't even tagged all the African releases as African, and if you click on African releases, then all of a sudden there's going to be Willie Nelson and a whole bunch of other things that just stuck in there because they think people will buy them. And they haven't, if I wanted to find all the albums from Madagascar that have come out in 2015, they are not tagged on Amazon. They may be there for sale, but they're impossible to find.
Can you talk about...
I think the world's that way, and there's no radio playing stuff, and all the independent weekly newspapers are mostly bought up by conglomerates and run stories that run across the nation instead of local interest.
Right. I want you to talk specifically about being in that period, and I guess this is the better point.
I'm still in that period.
Exactly.
Now
you tell the audience worldwide. You tell the audience. You tell the audience why it is. What was the space rock? What was going to? It was going to space. You've still been in space. Tisiji's in space. Garcia's in space. Okay.
Yeah. But yes, I was going to give Garcia's example. At the end of his life, numbed out by bad health and unfortunate drug choices, and there he's still in space. He's still in the 60s gateway to space, 70s gateway to space. Yeah, and I don't see that many folks finding that nowadays. And I'm not talking about finding it the way that other people found it in the past, but I see who comes to concerts, I see who's at guitar camps if I teach there and things like that. And not as many people, are finding Sun Ra's pathways to other worlds, or however you choose to get there.
All right, so let's go to the bridge here and say.
So what it was like. But wait, you were asking me what it was like.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like ask the fish what the water's like. It's just I don't know. I'm just doing my job.
Right, but
I'm just what's it like to be a cop, Jack Webb? I'm just doing my job, man.
No. Here's the talking to Henry Kaiser here on the Jake Feinberg Show. We're dealing with some technical things. Jackson, amazing engineer, is working through it. But Henry, I need you to talk to me and the audience, because there's one very simple thing. The reason why people's ears were wide open and could not just tolerate but accept this space music was because of acid. And you did, and I want you to take me through the acid tests before you picked up a guitar. And I want you to talk specifically about, I read somewhere where you talked about the Dead were obviously experimenting. They were tripping out and experimenting in music, but they were also very supportive of the audience that was tripping out. And I want you to give an example of them being supportive of the audience, because the acid opened people's ears. It was free and it was legal and it was totally pure.
Well, what I would say is, that the technology is what changes things. And acid was a technology of the time, and freeform radio was a technology of the time, and access to a lot of things, just the way that 78 records were a technology of the time in the 1920s that changed everything. But I oddly went to the Longshoremen's Hall acid test, oddly enough. I don't really remember it very well, except somebody on a ladder and a bunch of colors and lights and sounds. And a funny thing about me is that while I may have taken some hallucinogenic drug probably 3 times in my life maximum, I'm kind of like Salvador Dali, or probably Tiji Munoz would be, of, I don't need drugs because I am drugs.
That's
my job. I am drugs. So you're asking to ask the spirit animal about the normal people's lives and stuff. I'm not really paying that much attention.
No, but
to that aspect of
absolutely,
because I'm not involved in the normal way. I'm just there being the channel for whatever I'm the channel for, and I've been that way, from at least kindergarten.
So you are the spirit animal. Obviously, we know that. But I
have a weird point of view about things that's different from the typical point of view.
Yeah, so do I. I mean,
I don't participate in a crowd or a group so well. I can do something for a crowd or a group, but I'm not so good at being in the audience. I could be in an Indian music audience where they kind of sit quietly, but I'm not so good at being in an audience.
Could you go back? I read, like I said, I was reading about you talking about how the Dead were extremely supportive of the audience because they were experimenting while the band was trying to figure out how to experiment. And I feel cyclically in music, you build communal music out of a community.
The Grateful Dead were thinking about community of building music, not something.
Can you give an example of that? If like that you witnessed, where aside from just the musical, the transcendence of the music, where they were being supportive of their community, because like you said, you see the cats that show up for band camp today, you see the cats in the audience at your shows. They have had digital music crammed into their ears for 2 decades. So explain to me the example that you saw of them being supportive of their community.
If I could pick a number of different things. One thing I would pick was oddly enough, from Osley and other people's influence, trying to give good sound to the audience. Because the music communicates best through good full spectrum sound, full dynamic sound. And they were pioneers of doing that in amplified rock music. And that's done for the audience. That's not done for the people on stage.
And how is that? So,
and most groups didn't care.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about it.
Right.
And they thought about it, and they changed, the entire technology of live sound. In many ways, they tried many experiments like the wall of sound, but they made everything so much better. And we got things like Meyer sound because of them. We got people like Alembic, Rick Turner, Ron Wickersham making huge changes in electric guitar technology that influenced everything else that almost no one's noticed that has influenced everything else. And I think it came from this communal goodwill of caring about the audience and not being up there to get the ego and the audience gratification so much, as you would see with other rock bands. It was more the San Francisco way, than the English way.
Again, the time period that you started to see them, you were not a musician yet. And
nope, I started to play guitar in 1972. I first saw them probably 67.
Right, and so basically half the group weren't even musicians at that point. I mean, can you talk about how raw the band was? Because, by 74, they were beginning to percolate. The wall of sound came in. But again, these were guys that were thrashing around, with the exception of probably Garcia. Lesh was learning how to play the bass. Kreutzmann was a great drummer. Mickey really had a hard time keeping time. Bobby was just learning the rhythm guitar.
Still does, sorry.
That's right. I know it. I knew it. So, so, Mr. Kaiser, when you talk about supporting the audience, can you talk about how accessible? Because believe me, the handler. I just want to ask this question. The biggest problem with these cats today, not just the Dead, the handlers and the walls that have come up around them. Can you talk about how accessible these cats were?
Oh, you could just go up and talk to them if you wanted to, which I didn't start to do till much later, but until the 80s. But you could have just gone up and talked to somebody, and if you wanted to be, on the bus or part of the team, you had a way to talk yourself in. So many people I've known in the Grateful Dead organization, like the roadie Kid Candelario.
Oh yeah.
There was
cannot believe you just brought him up. Go ahead.
There was a Grateful Dead academic conference here in San Jose, California last year, and I insisted to Nick, the organizer, let me bring Kid to talk, because we'll do a panel with Kid, and Kid's never spoken, and he has stuff to say. And he's like, oh, okay. And I talked to Kid, who had terrible stage fright, didn't want to do it. And I basically dragged him there, and Bob Brailov had to hold his arms, talk him into it practically, is how it was. And then I brought him there, And then he just opened up to the audience, and he told an amazing story, which had never been in print, about how, just because he was interested in what he was doing, he got involved and got this job for years and years.
It's funny because I just was transcribing my second interview with John Shear, and he said, I was asking about each of the roadies. He said, Kid Candelario was a jerk when I first met him. The last time I saw him, he was still a jerk. He was one of those guys who actually thought he possessed the power and the brains of the band itself. In my view, even though he had been around the scene for a very long time, he didn't represent the band very well. He would often cause trouble with the promoters, co-promoters, building managers. Very irreverent guy, very bright guy, but over the years didn't add very much, in my view. I've been blasting that out on Facebook, along with his version of Steve Parrish, what he thought of him, and also Ramrod. But I can't believe you name-dropped Candelario.
Well, I think Candelario is very, very misunderstood by people like that, because Kid, as the interest in the Grateful Dead grew and grew and grew, and more people, wanted to talk to them or wanted a part of it or wanted, to get something,
right.
But he was as Parrish would be, he was one of the people who had to start to put up a wall to keep everybody who was trying to get in out, because you couldn't let everybody in anymore because there were too many people. And in doing that, he came off to many people as kind of a jerk. But I do not think so. I think he's one of the kindest, wisest people there, oddly enough, and I just base that on personally knowing him for years. I would remember a story from 1992 after David Lindley and I had made a record in Madagascar called World Out of Time, where we played with many great musicians in Madagascar, and then we brought some of these people over who were very poor people by American standards, had at that time annual income of about $200, and they were on tour. I was on tour with these Madagascar guys, and I said, let's go by and say hi to the Grateful Dead guys. We're just driving through Santa Fe. Let's go by Front Street and just go say hi.
Right.
Who's in Front Street right now.
Right.
So Rossi, kind of a pop star in Madagascar, but still a poor guy, and Rakuda Fra, 72-year-old, great master musician who basically lived in the slums in a cardboard box in Madagascar. We go by there, and they're kind of amazed. They're looking around this whole studio, and Rossi says, well, I went to the Real World studio at once in England, and it was all, didn't have as much cool stuff as this, but this is all funky. It's like Madagascar. And so we're walking around and we're looking at stuff, and Rossi says, when we were in the Real World studio, Peter Gabriel's place, we made this album there, and at the end, Peter Gabriel was saying goodbye when we were leaving, and I saw that there were a bunch of microphone cords in the trash can, and I asked Peter if I could have them because we don't have microphone cables that we need in our place in Madagascar. Peter said, no, those are ours. Go away. And and then Kid Candelario gave them 2 suitcases full of amazing gear to take back to Madagascar.
Kaiser, thank you for being on. Thank you so much for blessing this program, because I want as much meat and potatoes, a lot on the roadies specifically, and I'm glad that you could tell me that story, because I want to focus on you for a minute. Aside from the new perspective, I know my wife is Taiwanese, and every time I go to her southern fishing town in Taiwan, I'm always humbled by how happy the people are and how little they actually have. And so aside from that point of view, as Andrew Hill would say, point of departure that you may have changed when you went there with Lindley, could you talk about musically, when you went to Madagascar, how you grew as a musician?
Going to Madagascar with David Lindley broke the code of music from Madagascar for me. They have a different way of organizing music than we do. That, notes in the air, notes in space, that doesn't fit the Western musical notation or to try to understand it is normal harmony, melody, and rhythm, or the way beats are divided or things like that doesn't fit it. And direct contact with those musicians and the problems of trying to play that music with them and having to change to their mindset to be able to do it. In my poor Vazaha, which is their word for stranger, way. I think it's interesting that the Japanese call foreigners gaijin, barbarian, and Madagascar, the Vazaha is what they call a foreigner. But if they're in a foreign country, they're the Vazaha themselves. So anyway, in my Vazaha way, I broke that code and learned to intuitively understand that music. And their music, like a lot of music I like Korean shaman music and various kind of music from other places, is kind of a shamanistic music to get spirits to come. And that's the basis of a lot of Malagasy music, is their shamanistic music and music for those kind of spirit summoning ceremonies. And I kind of know how to plug into that.
Can you talk
on their channel now?
The word shaman is a very sexy word. It's thrown around a lot. Can you talk about a shaman that you met in Madagascar? And
oh no, I mean, any musician there can connect with the spirit world, no problem. And people's daily lives, their whole life is an ancestor worship religion where you're asking the ancestors for stuff. And so I just felt how they connected to it. It's not so much, there's people who conduct healing and shaman ceremonies, but anybody can be possessed, not just the shaman. And the musicians all have to connect to the spirit world to do what they do.
Could you, for the audience, again, we're in really in the age of pacification and digitization of music in this country and around the world. I'd like you to tell a specific story early on when you probably were not familiar with the language itself, but when could you talk about one of these stories of them connecting with their ancestors on a musical level, and the code started to change for Henry Kaiser?
Okay. How shall I tell this story?
Take your time. Pregnant pauses are not great, though, on live international.
Okay, so before we get there,
yes,
to Madagascar, I have this dream which says, and I usually don't dream, I just dream colored lights. I don't have narrative dreams or people in it, but I have this dream that says, we're the ancient ancestral spirits of Madagascar. We're so long dead that we're not in the tombs anymore. We're just dust in the air, part of the rivers, part of the air people breathe, and we cannot talk directly to the recent ancestors, the people who live in Madagascar now, because their recent ancestors, their parents and grandfathers and great-grandfathers are too noisy and block us out. But we talk to them through their whole lives, through dance, art, poetry, etc., that they're not really so. They know we're there, but they're not directly in communication with us. And you need to do several things for us. And they give me this list of things to do. And I wake up in the morning, and one of the things is to send a fax to this number and ask for a particular ceremony from this guy. So I look at the number. I look up the country code. It is a Madagascar country code. I call it. There's a fax tone. So I go type up what they told me to type up. I send it off, asking for this certain kind of ceremony. We get there. They say, hey, that was a really good idea to have the ceremony. How'd you know about Mr. Ramilison? I said, I didn't know. They just a message. They're like, yeah, okay, the spirits told you. And so he's head of the Hiragasi Union. When somebody dies in Madagascar, you put the body in a tomb, and then every year you take the body out and visit it, take it around, take it to its favorite restaurant, then you put it back in the tomb.
Right on.
When they get too rotten, you wrap a bunch of them up in a cloth. And they have special bands called Hiragasi bands that play at these occasions, the Famadiana, the turning of the bones, and this guy's the head of the association for that. And so he does this big ceremony for the ancient ancestors, and we're in an warehouse with a corrugated tin roof out in the middle of nowhere, edge of town, with all the people that we're going to play with invited. There's about 100 people in the room. He pours rum on lilies in our heads, speaks in Madagascar really fast, pours it in the four corners of the room, starts to give this big speech. Rossi, pop star from Madagascar, next to me explains that he's talking to the ancient ancestors because the ancient ancestors asked me to do this thing, and it's really good that they're doing this thing, so they do the thing. And he's getting really excited, and Rossi says, now he's like the preacher on the pulpit. He's getting more and more excited. He's building to the climax. And then the guy who's speaking remotely says, and he stops, and there's a crack of thunder outside. And when we went inside this building, it was blue sky, no clouds, no nothing, hot day. And everybody in the room's faces change. And Rossi says, hey, that means the ancient ancestors are paying attention. And then he does that about 3 more times. He stops, and there's a crack of thunder outside.
Oh, my God.
And then he gets to and then Rossi says, okay, now here comes the big climax, the end. And he gets to the end, la, 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 and there's a flash of blue light. The lights in the room go off. It immediately starts pouring rain. on the very noisy on this corrugated tin roof. I have with me 6 flashlights sitting in front of me. The ancient ancestors told me to bring to this thing. I turn the flashlights on, start to pass them around. Everybody's crying. And there's some really poor women who are crying. I say, Rossi, did I do something wrong with the flashlights? Why are they crying? He says, no, they're crying because it's the first rain of the rainy season, and it means the ancestors were paying attention. And I'm like, okay. So then we have this big party and the music and stuff. And then Lindley and I have this weird experiences several times when we have kind of these. We're in the little recording studio, which looks like a high school dorm room that's been neglected for 50 years, and different musicians will come in and play with us, and we have several times we have the experiences. They'll teach us a song, we can sort of play it, we turn on the tape, we can play it really well, and they'll be coming along and they will have forgotten to teach us a section of the song, and then we look down at our hands and they just play it and we aren't thinking about it, like we're possessed. It is weird.
Wow. That is, you know what, Kaiser, I mean, this is...
I usually don't tell that story.
Well, that's why we're on the Jake Feinberg Show. You know, listen, we got a piece of music here to play for you.
Sure.
Settle in, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay.
Okay.
The music of what Miles was doing with electronic music was overlooked and has never really ever risen to any kind of, not pop level, but
because it threatens racist white people. Why do you think? I mean, here's music that's not Miles's period from sort of Bitches Brew, Jack Johnson, on through like Harta and Pangaea, 1975, is music that's Afro-logical, if you care, based on African musical logic, not based on European Eurological, if you will, musical logic. And it's music that for people to enjoy. People could dance, people could listen to it, people could be changed by it, but it wasn't safe. It wasn't the same every time. It wasn't a packageable commodity so much, even though the label tried, and Miles didn't help them package it and commodify it the way that they did later on when he came back out of retirement later on. I think it was too much of a threat, and it doesn't fit the Western musical grid or the Western understanding. I base that on seeing the band many times, knowing its recordings, talking to many of the people in the band, and with my pal Wadada Leo Smith doing quite a few concerts and two disc sets of that material, and pretty much played all the material from that era to understand it. And it's not like a melody and an improvisation. It's something else. It's a bunch of other things, actually.
Who did you talk to in the band about this?
Oh, back in 1973, 74, I'd go see him, and when I was living in Boston in college, I'd go see him at the Jazz Workshop or Paul's Mall, and I talked to Pete Cosey when I was just starting to play guitar. I'd been playing since 1972, and Pete Cosey was very, very helpful to me in explaining what he was doing. I would just go up in the break and say, "Explain to me what you're doing." Pete Cosey was this guitarist from Chicago who'd been a chest record session guitarist, enormously big man, fat, read that, in a muumuu with a beard and weird glasses and long beard and big frizzy hair, and he played sitting down, and it was coaxing crazy sounds out of the guitar, crazier than Hendrix, and playing faster and stranger than John McLaughlin. And he told me some stuff, and years later, and one of the things he told me, I said, "How are you doing that particular crazy sound?" He says, "I plugged this cable halfway into this fuzz." I bought Jordan Boss Tone. The next day I went out and I bought one. Years later, after I had done some of the Yo Miles with Wadada, Bob Belden, who was a reissue producer for Sony, had done a project called Miles from India, where he got Indian musicians to play with musicians who'd play with Miles and do music of that period. And he'd gotten Pete Cosey, and Pete Cosey got sick and couldn't do some dates on the tour, so I went and subbed for Pete Cosey because I'd been playing all that stuff with Wadada, piece of cake to play it, and I knew a lot about Indian music, so easy to play with those guys, and that was fun. And then they came back some months later and played at a big jazz festival in San Francisco, and they had Pete Cosey, and they called up and said, "Why don't you come and hang with us?" So I went to hang with them, and they had a long rehearsal, and Pete said, thanks for subbing for me before. I really like the 8 Mile stuff. Come sit next to me on stage, and I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing while I play. Like he had to pass it on and explained how he thought and how he organized music while he was playing solos, talking to me. And then we were talking about equipment, talking. He said, I still wish I had that Jordan Boss Tone Fuzz I used to have. And I said, you mean the one that I asked you about at the Jazz Workshop in 1974? And he says, you asked me? And I was like, yes, I did. And I said, and I went and bought one the next day, and I'll go get it at home, and I'll bring it and give it to you at the concert tonight.
Wow.
So
you're waxing poetic. I just love having Kaiser on the program.
You got to take care of those great ancestors when you can.
Can you talk to I think this is fascinating. I'm just sort of getting hip to this. Can you talk about synesthesia? You have this. Can you talk about that?
So synesthesia is a neurological condition where your senses are crossed, and you might see colors and shapes for sounds, smells, might create touch sensations on your skin. Any of your senses can be crossed. Oddly enough, my wife, Brandy Gale, a Canadian artist, is kind of the poster woman for synesthesia because she has the maximum far end of the bell curve synesthesia with all senses crossed all the time. So basically it's like being on acid, heavy dose of acid.
Sounds amazing.
Probably intravenously injected lysergic acid diethylmol, I-25, right, all the time. So, but I also have shapes and sounds to color synesthesia. So I see music as a bunch of patterns in space and colors and sounds and things that are moving. They look like a Jordan Belson film, if anybody knows what that is. Probably nobody does. And that's my secret trick of how I organize music. I don't really pay attention to the Western organization or write stuff out to remember stuff. I just have all these patterns and colors and shapes in my mind, and I can just look at those.
Could you just try?
Garcia had that too.
He did.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now, can you talk about how
Einstein, Marilyn Monroe, lots of famous people.
Can you talk how you fuse that with original music creation?
I don't think about it. I got a guitar in 1972, and when I started to do music and have fun, that's the tool I had to learn how to do stuff. And it probably has something also to do with seeing statistical patterns of how things are organized. I mean, looking at notes as scales and rhythms divided up in meters the way we do in the West is just one way of looking at things. It's just, one blind guy looking at an elephant and saying, oh, the elephant's like a snake. And the other guy saying, but no, it's like a big leaf. That's just one of the ways at describing patterns of sound, and I have different system that I can steal from my synesthesia and kind of cheat, and I have my own system. I don't really think about it. I've just always done it that way.
How does Arctic diving relate to music?
Antarctic diving, you mean, not Arctic diving.
And then how does synesthesia disappear if it does when diving?
No, diving's like, okay, so I have been a diver since I was 11. I watched Sea Hunt on American television, always wanted to learn to dive. When I got to be 11, I could lie enough believably about my age and say I was 12, got certified as a diver here in California, dove all through since then and through college. And then after college, I came back to California. A friend of mine had been to University of California, Berkeley. He'd been part of their scientific research diving program there, introduced me to them, went diving with the boss, diving supervisor, diving safety officer, and they said, let's train you to be an instructor. So for 17 years, parallel to a music career, and also I'm a film director, I did a lot of TV directing, I taught underwater research at UC Berkeley. Our program went away back around 2001. At that time, I was lucky enough to get to go to do some scientific work in Antarctica, and I've returned now. I just finished my 11th deployment in the U.S. Antarctic program, a couple of months a year, as a scientific diver down under the ice. I love diving. I love diving under the ice most. I love doing science work and video under the ice, so it's just like I love playing music or I love making films. so they all kind of mixed up. They're just things I love.
Can you talk about?
But wait, let me come back to it. So
Sure.
Here I am. I'm diving under 20 feet of ice. It may have snow on top. It may be pitch black, or it may be, blues and greens and beautiful colors overhead with light coming down. All kinds of crazy life on the bottom, where critters that are normally small are gigantic, and surrounded by Weddell seals. A big seal that's about 800 pounds that makes sounds underwater that sounds like electronic music from the 1950s, sounds like Forbidden Planet soundtrack. It's a pretty spacey environment. It's, again, something like mainlining LSD to be in that environment and to be doing in that environment and doing work. So that's one of my jobs. In that environment, I'm seeing different shapes, colors, sounds, patterns, feeling different rhythms of movement in the water, hearing really different sounds you never hear, like the way these seal sounds combined with sounds of ice cracking. And those just all get converted to, the visual patterns get converted to sound in my mind, and the body rhythm patterns are changed, things that don't happen to your body when you're in normal warm water, and they all come out as music. And so they sneak in everything else. I've done a lot of solo guitar that's really based on things from Antarctica, but that's a main part of my life now.
One of the L's on the Jake Feinberg Show is leadership, and I would like you to talk. I mean, clearly, how do you mentor cats? Because, like you said, you have such an unorthodox, because of synesthesia, you have an unorthodox way of interpreting everything. So how do you mentor, aside from the bandstand? Can you talk about a story about being a leader?
Yeah, I'm just like the spirit animal that passes through the story, that redirects the other protagonist's attention to something else or makes them make a different choice. So I just try to, my music lesson policy is I'll give anybody one free lesson, and that's it, because that's all I have really to give. And I'll just try to point out something they don't know that sends them down some path they haven't been on.
Can you give an example?
And I'm not trying to, most people teach guitar, they're trying to put you on a path that you want to go on or that they want to send you on. And I just kind of look at the person and see what they know and what they don't know, and I say, okay, I guess you need to know this. Here's this piece of information. I guess you need to, you need to know about this music from Korea, or I guess you need to know that to pick this particular way. I don't know. I just see what the person needs, tell them what I think they need. But if somebody wants to learn to play like me or play like Jerry Garcia or play like Captain Beefheart, I'm not the best tool for the job.
Well, Henry Kaiser, we burned through the first set here. We're going to have to do part two in the next couple of weeks. Did you enjoy yourself?
Yes, it's terrific. No, I wish I was there so we could do, I wish you had a fundraising marathon or something so we could talk for 4 hours,
No, listen. We are going to pick this up. We're just getting started with you, Kaiser, but I'll get a file out to you later today, and I thank you for transcending with me during this period.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so cool. Next, my wife's parents live in Phoenix, so maybe, and I often go visit friends in Tucson.
We're hanging, baby. We're going to hang.
Okay, that sounds great.
Love always.
Thank you, sir.
All
Bye-bye.
right, we'll be right back on the Jake Feinberg Show.